It will indeed. Let's talk about Mikel Arteta then. You mentioned him there. He's worked under Pep for many years. I mean, what a grounding this is, Mike. He's worked under Arsene Wenger, of course, and then Pep Guardiola. It doesn't get better than that. He is now in charge of Arsenal. It hasn't all gone his way so far, but this is a man who is overseeing a real sea change at the Emirates, and he does seem to be making small incremental steps, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's taking time, but I think it would be crazy at this stage, for any speculation about his future and will he last this season. You've got to judge him on much longer timeframes. I think what's happened at Arsenal over the past few years is, we talk about a sea change. It's monumental going from Arsene Wenger, and I think what has happened is that Arsene Wenger was all about the culture of the club. He was all about players being in the best physical, emotional, mental state at all times. And there was a lot of leeway, I think, afforded to players, and hierarchies kind of, emerged themselves in that dressing room, but it wasn't with success. So what's happened when Wenger's gone? The club as a club, it's, as an entire club in terms of the fan base, in terms of the boardroom level, I think they just wanted more tactical nous and logic, and they wanted to be able to, just create this system that was greater than the sum of its parts on a football level, just putting the emotions to one side and let's be really technical and as good as we can be and keep up with the way that the game's going. So they've brought in two managers, very logical, very similar managers in so many ways, but they've kind of got this cultural legacy that's falling apart that, it's like, I liken this a little bit to Mark Hughes. I've said about Mark Hughes in the past that, he talks about having never been relegated, but he's seen a few relegations in the rearview mirror, because players get pampered, they get looked after in a certain way. And then when that emotional side stops, these players, you don't know who's on side and who's not. And you have all these little dynamics that start to play out, that it's not just about the football. There's all this stuff going on, but you've got managers that don't necessarily understand this side of the game.
Yeah, it is the discipline, isn't it, that Arteta is bringing and is improving. Because like you say, Wenger always protected his players. The cliche is that he didn't see it. He never did. And especially when his players were causing the misdemeanor or the indiscretion, he never, ever saw it. And he was, by all accounts, very soft with a lot of his players, particularly those senior pros. Arteta wants, I think, all of his players on a more level playing field, you'd guess. There might be a slight hierarchy, of course, but that's naturally develops. But he doesn't want anything like what happened under Wenger. And I guess that is one way of doing it, is by shipping out some of the players that are disruptive influences. And we've seen the likes of Ozil go out. Guendouzi, this more recently, has gone as well. I don't know what these players are like on a day-to-day basis, but the way some of them have gone so quickly under Arteta suggests that they aren't good for team spirit and team bonding.
Yeah, and I think there's an important point to make here as well, in that I think Arteta, even though he's inexperienced, is a big step forward on Unai Emery. Purely on a communication level, I think Arteta, having worked previously with Wenger, but also his capability with languages, his understanding of English football culture, and all of these different types of things, I think he's coming from a place of knowledge, even though it's not his skill set. He gravitates towards the logical, technical side. This is what he obsesses about, is the best system, the best way to play football, and all the tactical nuances that go alongside that. But he also appreciates, even though it's not his biggest strength to deal with these things, so he's kind of slowly working through them as best he can before he gets to a point. Arsenal just want to get to a point where it's just all about the football. These dynamics have been worked through. It's going to be painful. It's going to take time, because it's not necessarily Arteta's flow state or his skill set to immediately know what to do in any given situation in terms of dealing with people's emotions. But there is some kind of experiential knowledge of understanding the way that Wenger operates, having worked alongside Pep Guardiola. He kind of knows what he wants to do, but he's going to make mistakes along the way. And he is going to upset certain players along the way, and has done. But as transfer windows pass, his culture, as in a working culture, will begin to take over. And once that happens, and I think there's signs that it's beginning to happen now, once that happens, then we can really start to judge Arteta of the type of manager he's capable of being. I don't think we've seen even the beginnings yet of what what manager Arteta could be. It's almost like he's gone into a house and it just needs loads and loads of renovations before he can begin to decorate it. And everyone's just saying, well, that's not Guardiola's house. You're not the same as Guardiola. And it's like, there's so much work to be done yet before you start, before you start doing the interior work and really making it, what you want it to be.
I guess one of the areas that he needed to work on was the defence. Arsenal have been associated with pretty much a shoddy back line for many years, particularly under Wenger as well, who almost seemed to ignore that area of the field. Arsenal have had their problems scoring goals at times last season, but they don't make as many mistakes at the back. And Arteta wants his sides to play on the front foot, but he also wants them to play with, he talks about sort of players taking the initiative a little bit as well, controlling games and taking the game to the opposition. He's got all these ideas. Do you think there's maybe too many ideas swimming around and getting all those messages across to the players? He speaks 4 or 5 different languages, so no communication problems. I think that is a real strength of his. But do you think that there's almost just too many ideas swimming around and there's ideas from previous regimes also still in the players' heads?
It's a possibility because I don't think his mind ever stops in terms of solving problems. I think he's always strategizing, always trying to solve problems. I think he's conscious that not to feed too much, but that's not to say that, how much is too much. His opinion of what's too much some players might have a different opinion. It's a step-by-step process. And we talk about, the defense and stuff like that. I think he wants to get certain fundamentals and foundations in place first before he moves forward. But ultimately, he's trying to create an entire system. And I think the things he talk about will be consistent. But ultimately, the ownership of the performance is with the players. He's trying to get players that think for themselves, that understand his concepts. But it's on them ultimately when they cross the white line, that in terms of understanding everything that he wants them to understand, that he's throwing at them. So it's going to take time. It's not just like a simple template. This will be a really complex system and way of thinking that Arteta wants to instill in the players. It's going to take time, but there's just lots of work to do to get there in the first place.
Let's talk about his communication skills then. As you say, lots of different languages spoken. That can only help in the dressing room. Arsene Wenger insists on one language being spoken by all players, whereas we believe that Arteta is happy to, let players communicate in whichever way they see fit, as long as they're delivering on the pitch. I guess that's the payoff. But just his communication with the individual players as well. Jack Harrison worked under him very briefly at Man City and said that with the younger players, he was brilliant. He said it was just those little bits, those little nuggets, those bits of information. He said that Arteta the next day wouldn't even remember that he said to you, but to a young player like Harrison, they really stuck in his head and they really resonated. And that's how he was able to improve his game. So yeah, the likes of Bukayo Saka coming through, and there'll be plenty more. Emile Smith-Rowe, of course. It must be a really good experience working under Arteta for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're kind of getting into the realms of the comparisons and differences between Arteta and Guardiola now as well, because Guardiola, I've read some features about the past relationship coming into this pod, and basically, Guardiola's described as standoffish. That is the main difference between them. They use the same functions. They see the game in much the same way. You can understand why they get on so well because they're constantly talking the same language. But Guardiola's a bit standoffish. He has to take a step back and process things. Arteta needs to get to the heart of a problem straight away. He needs fast answers. And he just constantly going round trying to solve problems continuously. So he, like you say, players might forget what he said to a player from one day to the next because he's just too busy going from one thing to the next, solving problems continuously. And that's the key difference between them both, is that Arsenal's a big rebuilding job, and I don't think it's a rebuilding job that Pep Guardiola would be comfortable doing because there's just too much action needed before the process begins to emerge. Whereas someone like Arteta is all about action, he's all about just getting on top of things and just clearing away all the mess before you get to it. But the fundamental principles are the same and are there. So this is basically what it's all about. It's about a manager that just has to tackle the immediate problem head on all the time. And I think over time, rather than him start from the position of here's my process, this is the way it's going to be. And not really knowing how to deal with problems that come along as they come along. Arteta's almost taking the opposite approach. He's getting all the problems out of the way, and gradually over time, you'll begin to see his process and his philosophy begin to emerge. But like I say, that if that process and that philosophy is, of the highest caliber, we've not even got to that stage yet. And all of this is to come with Arteta, I do believe.
We probably read the same articles, Mike, I would imagine, on him and Pep. Just a few quotes from Pep about Arteta. They obviously speak in glowing terms of one another. And when Arsenal played City last year, it was the narrative. They were asked about it several times. Pep talks about Arteta's incredible work ethic. Arteta himself speaks about having to put your family second when you're both a player and a coach, to your career. He said sometimes things take so much time that you do have to just put other things on the back burner. Pep also says that Arteta has an incredible eye for detail and, as you say, a knack for finding solutions. He also says that he's never seen anyone analyse matches and react so quickly to things that are going wrong on the pitch. And he also suggests that Arteta is going to create something special at Arsenal, but like you were saying, needs time to do it. But there's such a good bond between those two. But as you say, very different personalities. And, they're now working separately. They're now rivals in the Premier League, but there's a lot of skills shared between them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is there, Guardiola mentions it, it is about quick solutions with Arteta. It's about how much work he gets through so quickly. That is probably what impresses Guardiola, because it's like he can't get through that much work as quickly as Arteta can, but yet they talk the same language. He knows that the fundamental principles underlying what Arteta wants to do, when they have conversations about tactics and about where games can be won and lost and what went right and wrong on any given match, like Guardiola will be looking and thinking, yeah, his information's good, and it's like, and so there's so many similarities, but what I would say is that with Guardiola, the ideas, the new ideas that nobody's ever thought of before, because his world's so internalized, he's able to come up with these things that nobody's ever thought before. Whereas Arteta has got just as many principles, will have so much experience from having had this back and forth with Guardiola for so many years and understanding the game, because he's very, very dedicated to the tactical side of the game. So he's got more than enough tools in his toolbox to not have to start generating new ideas of how to play the game, but he will get through the actions of putting things into place, the logistics and the day-to-day work. His appetite is much bigger than Guardiola's to be able to go through all that stuff. Guardiola needs people alongside him to help him with it all.
I imagine he's pretty hands-on on the training ground as well. Willian was asked about the difference between Frank Lampard and working under Mikel Arteta. And I don't know whether he was slightly disparaging to Lampard or not, but he said about Arteta, he said there's a huge noticeable difference. He said that Arteta focuses heavily on the tactical side of the game on the training pitch, whereas Lampard wasn't too involved in all of that. So clearly Arteta's there every single day, you would imagine, working on different systems, different tactics, helping players to improve. I imagine, everything you've said so far, I imagine he's a sleeves rolled up kind of guy, isn't he?
Absolutely. And I mean, we talk about the workload and appetite for workload. I mean, we're going back to what we said about Nigel Adkins. You can just, all of that is just as applicable here. What William's saying, it comes down to personality types. It's like, it's easy to be disparaging of Lampard now. He's out of work and, Arteta's still in a job and they were being compared like for like maybe 12 months ago. But, Lampard is about emotions. He's about connecting with players on an individual basis and understanding what their motivations are and assuming that the motivation of the player is already innate. It's already there for them to want to learn certain things themselves. Whereas Arteta's a much more controlling type of personality. It's all about the logic. But if a player's got an emotional problem, Arteta possibly doesn't know how to deal with it. So that obviously just suggests that William favours Arteta's approach more than Lampard's. But that is, that would be the main concern with Arteta, is that emotional intelligence side. I think to some degree it is there. There is empathy. There's enough study gone in to understand the mindsets of players. And there's enough past experience at Premier League level, at Arsenal as a football club, in all these different scenarios, that there's enough reference points, at least for Arteta, to understand, okay, this might not be a strength of mine, but I know what might be going on here. So this is possibly the best way to try and solve this problem. But just don't expect him to maneuver it effortlessly, like, say, Lampard would in the same situation.
And this has been a long time coming, though. He talks about how, from about 2014, he was already eyeing up his coaching badges. Players at Arsenal used to call him coach at times and ask him on the training ground what they should do about a situation. Maybe, Wenger and co weren't giving them the advice that they needed, so they turned to Arteta. So this is something that, hasn't just happened overnight. He hasn't just found himself in the position of strength. He's not just arrived alongside Guardiola. This is something he's aimed for, and he might well have plotted this path. Do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a good balance to him here. We're talking about learning and development, because for some people that are driven towards outcomes all the time, it's not always natural to go inside and learn and develop on longer time frames. You're just too busy solving problems all the time because it's a flow state to just get to the heart of something. To actually take a step back, study long and hard over a long time frame, that requires real effort. So I think that's where, we can talk about Arteta being a really strongly developed individual in terms of he knows he's got a very long-term vision about where he wants to go. And I don't think anything would stand in his way. I think he is a manager. I think he's going to be a successful manager on some level. Even if things don't go according to plan at Arsenal, I still think he's a manager with a big future ahead of him, and it could be Arsenal that in the future turn around regretting it if they ever did part ways.
A couple of how does he deal questions here for you, Mike. First of all, how do you think he deals with egos within the squad? Obviously, we've seen some players shipped out, but the nature of the Premier League and the money that is involved and the status as well, of course. How do you think he deals with those players who are maybe have a higher, opinion of themselves than some of their teammates? And also, how does he deal with the pressure as well? Arsenal fans are relentless at times. They want glory. They've enjoyed success in the past and they feel like they want it again. If you listen to phone-ins on certain radio stations, they almost want it instantly. We know that doesn't happen, and we know that won't happen under Arteta. How does he deal with all this? Has he got a way of blocking out all the sound that's coming from, social media, from the media in general? What do you reckon?
I think in terms of dealing with that, I don't think it's a problem for him. I just think he is. I don't think he's fazed by anything. So pressure's not something that necessarily registers on Arteta's radar. I don't think he'll ever feel consumed or overwhelmed by outside noise because he's just got such a fixed mindset of what he wants to achieve next and achieve next and achieve next, and he's just he's working to his own sort of blueprint, I guess. In terms of dealing with players and individual players, with the Aubameyang thing's been interesting because when he first came into the club, he was really bigging up Aubameyang. He knew as soon as he walked through the door that here's our star player, here's an elite player who can be a difference maker. And his form was incredible initially in terms of the FA Cup run and beating Manchester City in the FA Cup semi-final and then winning the final against Chelsea. These were real big performances from a big time player, but slowly over time, he's pulled rank and basically, he dropped him from, was it the North London derby last season and stuff like that, putting his stake in the ground more and more as time goes by that, listen, there's certain things I'm not going to tolerate. And I think it was a short-term measure at the time because he knew to get an instant impact, he needed his big players on side, but more and more over time, there'll be less of that. It won't be tailoring and pampering to the needs of individuals anymore. That's the sea change and that's the culture shift that's happening at Arsenal, slowly but surely. And I think with each transfer window that passes, more and more players will inhabit that dressing room who are of Arteta's mindset and know exactly what they're going to be getting and understand what to expect.
Does that mean Arsenal will be shopping in a very different market this summer and January and so on as well? Because often Arsenal have, they're not being big spenders. There's not a huge influx of players coming through every transfer window, but usually there's one or two big purchases. Someone who's usually had a pretty good season from a league across Europe, and that has been like the marquee signing. Do you think we're going to see fewer big names, same amount of money spent, but across a wider spectrum of players?
Yeah, this will be an interesting, the recruitment is going to be interesting because I think we've let fewer trophy signings, I think, is what we can expect. I think age could be a thing here. I think proven players of the highest caliber, under 25, absolutely. But, seasoned pros who might even be in the peak of the careers, but, don't want to be defined by where Arsenal are now, for example. Aubameyang being the prime example of a player whose career could have taken him in many different directions, has been long talked about as one of the biggest players in Europe. And, you wonder about the motivations there, the personal motivations over the collective cause and stuff like that. I think this is where Arteta solves the culture problem, is through the recruitment. As long as the recruitment's clever in terms of recruiting players, understanding what their motivations will be based on their profile and where they've been previously, where they're at in their careers, and not going into the transfer market with an attitude of, we're Arsenal, this is what we've done in the past, this is what we can pay. That's not the way to go about it. It's very much the beginnings of a whole new sort of culture and strategy emerging of what Arsenal's going to be in the future, completely separate to what it was under Arsene Wenger.
That will mean that some fans are vastly underwhelmed by the business, but then actually, roll on a couple of years and they begin to see the fruits of it?
I think it's just going to require patience all round, because, it's a big leap that Arsenal have got to take, and they're not going to take it in one season. So it kind of almost doesn't matter if they were to finish 7th or 8th again this season. You just want to see signs of progress in terms of the football. You just want to see, because this, again, it can all fall into place quite suddenly when it does fall into place. But in the meantime, it's all about a process. It's not about results at this stage. And Arteta's as results driven as anybody. But ultimately, he knows what's going on behind the scenes. He knows what he's trying to build. It's a vision. We can go back to what we've said about Everton in recent weeks, and not appointing managers who are visionaries or innovative enough. You're just going to get that solid consistency. Arsenal have gone down the innovation route. So when you go down the innovation route, there's going to be teething troubles. It's not just going to all fall into place, because you're not working to a set template that just gets the best out of what you've got right now. You're working to a vision, regardless of whether you've got the tools in the building right now or not. You're just trying to edge your way there. But when all of a sudden all the tools are there and everything's in place, you can just suddenly go from being 6th or 7th one season to genuine title contenders the following season.
So then, final question: how long do you think it'll take Mikel Arteta to get Arsenal back into that top 4? And will he fall short? There's so many variables, of course, because we've seen Leicester and West Ham greatly improve. Spurs have got a new manager. There's so many things to factor in. But in your opinion, is Arteta the man to do it? And are we looking 2, 3, 4 seasons?
I'm not sure, to be honest, in terms of time frame. I think for me, the biggest indicator might be winning big matches. I think Arteta proved when he first came into the club that he's capable of tactically outthinking opponents. He outthought Guardiola in that semi-final. He's capable of being the difference maker in big matches on a tactical level. But then since then, we've regressed now back to cultural problems. It was almost like a honeymoon period where he showcased what he was capable of in one-off big matches. Now, if Arsenal can get back to being the club that are just, you can guarantee that they're going to be really difficult in them one-off big matches, then, the consistency of performances against the lesser weights in the division will come later. That will fall into place into time. That's not necessarily something to worry about. But it's just getting glimpses from time to time of players understanding what's being asked of them against the best opposition, not being phased against that opposition because the process is good and everybody understands that the process is good. The consistency will come later. So I think Arsenal need to get back, first and foremost, to being a team that can compete in those big matches and start to be respected again in 6-pointers against, the top 4.